Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Carry by Faith. I know that it's been some time since I've um, released a video. I have been trying to figure out the best way to put this video together, and I still haven't figured that out, but I have been praying about this. I prayed before I created this video. So by the grace of God, I just pray that God just takes control over this video, that he leads me in the direction that he wants this video to go, so he can accomplish whatever it is that he wants to accomplish. So guys, I'm really just allowing God to just lead me through this video right now. My last video, I mentioned that God is transitioning me in this time of my life in my works with assisting single mothers. If you have time to go back and look at that previous video, I would suggest you do that if you care to. But I want to talk a little bit more about that briefly in my journey as a single mother. So my son is 10 years old. I'm a single mother. And just before my son turned 1 year old, we had fell into homelessness. So this was 9 years ago. I was working full time. I was going to school full time to become a nurse. And I had little to no support. The only support that I really had was my mother, and she was working as well. So she would help as much as she could. But we had got to the point, we fell into homelessness because I had gotten to the point where I was having to decide if I was going to pay rent or childcare. I had to pay for childcare out of pocket for a toddler. At that time, childcare was like $700 a month. And rent back then wasn't as much as it is now. This is 9 years ago. But rent was just about the same, about $800 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment, which we had. So I remember getting to that point where I was just drowning, not able to keep my head above water with taking care of all the responsibilities as a single mom. And I remember just, seeking assistance, like seeking help. I was going to, like charities, churches, just community organizations. And I was always turned down or denied for denied for assistance because I was always told that I made too much. Now, at that time, I was only making like $13 to $14 an hour. So I was told that my $14 an hour salary was too much to qualify for any assistance at all with childcare or rental assistance. So, due to just the lack of support, we ended up falling into. So we ended up checking into a local shelter that houses mothers and their children. And I remember one of the first things that they had me do was to fill out an application for cash assistance, childcare, and food assistance. Now, I remember talking to the intake coordinator that I had just filled out the same application not even 30 days ago, and I was denied because I was over the income limit. And at this time, I had lost my job because I didn't have childcare because I couldn't afford childcare. So I was like, I know that for a fact I'm not going to qualify because now I don't have a job at all. And she explained to me that my circumstances were different. I was in an emergency state at this moment. And so they would definitely help me because it was considered emergency assistance. And sure enough, I was approved for all the assistance that they had me to apply for. And that was mind-blowing because not even 30 days ago, I was seeking the same assistance. And I just needed just a little bit of help just to help me to get by so that I didn't end up in this circumstance, in this predicament. So I remember being in the shelter and meeting and hearing the stories of so many other mothers who were literally going through the same situation and had been through the same situation, and they had been there for months trying to get out of that predicament. But at the time, before they ended up there, all they needed was just a little bit of help. They were working, they were taking care of their kids, and it may have been one situation, one circumstance that came up, where they weren't able to, pay their rent that month. And that one circumstance just led them down a rabbit hole, that it was hard for them to pull themselves back out of, and they ended up in this situation, but they only just needed just a helping hand, just a little bit of assistance. But it led them to that that place where they have been stuck at for months. It was just so mind-blowing to me that that there were so many other mothers that were going through that. I know as moms, when we go through things, it's hard for us to even, I know for me, when I was going through that, I felt like I was the only mom in the world, that it was just me that was going through that. Like, how could I be going through this? Like, there couldn't be anyone else that's dealing with this. And it wasn't until I got into that shelter that I realized, like, there are so many moms out there who are dealing with this. So we were in the shelter for about maybe 3 to 4 weeks at the most. One thing that was really odd to me is that the shelter, they require individuals to at least be in their program for 2 months before they will help you transition. Before they help you with the transitional housing phase, which was very odd to me. One, because I had things pretty much set up within 2 weeks. Like when I knew that we were getting ready to check into the shelter, one, I knew that we were not going to be in that situation long. And I had already started applying for jobs, looking for another job, and looking for another apartment. So within 2 weeks, I had an approval for an apartment and I had a job offer. So I was, in the shelter and just needed assistance with the transition phase. But they were actually trying to hold me in the program longer because they wanted me to be there for at least 2 months before they would officially help me with transition, which was very odd to me. But even though we were there through, just for those 3 weeks, it felt like we were there for 2 months. Emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, that experience I took a huge hit in those areas of my life, but I also learned a lot. It was a very eye-opening experience. I remember, right at the point where, I lost my job and I knew that we were losing our apartment and that we were getting ready to check into this homeless shelter, I fell into this state of depression and heavy drinking. I was drinking from the time that I woke up to the time that I went to sleep, not really caring about what the consequences would be for me drinking the way that I was drinking. It was really bad. And even after the point that I had, left the shelter and I had got back on my feet, that was one of the things that carried with me was the drinking, using drinking as a crutch and as a coping method. Even though I was helping single mothers, I still had a lot of things that I was going through that I hadn't dealt with, things that I had suppressed. We had just came out of homelessness. That is a traumatic event, and it was never addressed. I just kept on pushing like nothing ever even happened, and that was a trauma response that I had formed. I had this fear of falling back into homelessness, and I refused to let that happen. So I had 3 and 4 jobs that I was working at one time, working myself tirelessly, and I did that for about 4 years. And during that 4 years of me working myself to the ground, I missed out on 4 years of my son's life that I will never get back. And I started walking in shame. I was walking in guilt, constantly beating myself up about how I failed, and I allowed myself to fall in that predicament. And I allowed the enemy, I started listening to the enemy's lies that I wasn't good enough and that no one would ever love me. With this child, being a single mother, there was just a lot that I had went through, that I was going through emotionally, mentally, and spiritually that I didn't address. And that carried that baggage. I carried that baggage for a long time, and it followed me in relationships and career opportunities, and it ruined a lot of those things as well. Walking in that shame, walking in that guilt, I was agreeing with the lies that the enemy was telling me, that I was unlovable. I wasn't good enough. No one would love me, and I was settling. I was ended up in relationships that I had no business being in. So about 5 years ago, I was in a really toxic relationship. It was emotionally, mentally, and physically abusive. And that relationship led me to a crossroad. And it wasn't only the relationship that led me there, but just the years of carrying that baggage, that trauma, resentment, bitterness, unforgiveness. And the relationship just put the cherry on top. But I was at my lowest 5 years ago. Lowest. I was in a really dark place. I didn't even recognize myself. Mentally, honestly, I didn't know if I would ever be able to recover. I was in so much pain. I had so much pain in my heart. I just remember crying out to God and begging God to just take the pain away. I was questioning God, like, how could I go through this? How could you allow me to experience this, God? Or why am I experiencing this? And I was in so much pain that instead of me seeking God, and the enemy uses these situations to creep in. He's always looking for an opening. And so I was experiencing so much pain in my heart that I went to the world. I went to the world to find a cure to heal my heart, to get rid of this pain. And I started getting into new age practices. Getting into tarot readings, getting into, I was into astrology. Now, it didn't last long and I wasn't in that deep, but still, it doesn't matter. It was too much. And it was too much to begin with, to even just take that route. But all because I was just in so much pain, and I wanted to take the pain away. I just wanted to be relieved of that pain. And, I was resorting to, more alcohol, coping with more alcohol. But I had reached a crossroad when I had gotten to the point where God sat me down. He literally came and sat me down, and he told me to reflect. He had me reflect over the last 10 years of my life at that time. And he told me to reflect over where I was emotionally, mentally, spiritually, physically, and financially. And as I was reflecting, I realized that the last 10 years of my life at that time had been a complete blur. Like, I couldn't really remember anything. But what I could remember was pain. I had this pain, like this deep sense of pain in my heart, you guys. And I was just asking God, like, what is this? Like, because I know that there has been plenty of joyous times throughout that time span, but that was all that I could feel. And God brought it to my attention that, yes, I want to sit you down so that you can reflect over where your life is headed, because it was headed down a dark path had I continued doing what I was doing in the world. But he wanted me to address that pain. And I have a scripture for that he had given me. And it's from Proverbs 4:23. And this is a New Living Translation. And it says, guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. So, as I said, I was dealing with this deep pain. And instead of me seeking God, I was seeking the world, trying to soothe this pain that I was feeling. And that was going to determine the course of my life, which was not a good path. So it was a very uncomfortable process, I would say that. Having to sit back and reflect on every situation where I felt hurt or betrayed or harmed by a friend, a family member, an ex, a coworker, whatever it may be. Having to reflect on all those situations, and also to forgive. First, I had to forgive myself. You have to show kindness and compassion towards yourself. Forgive yourself for those things that you went through. God already forgave you, so forgive yourself. I had to forgive, like I said, those that betrayed me or caused harm, whether they knew it or not. I forgave them, And I also asked for forgiveness. I'm not perfect. I'm not going to sit here and play victim or act like I'm perfect. I even verbally apologized and asked for forgiveness to certain individuals that God instructed me to do so, but and others, I just took it to God. During that sit down, God had brought me to a crossroad. In that crossroad, he showed me where my life was and where I was headed if I continued to do things the way that I was doing them. And he also showed me what my life would be if I seeked him and if I went on the path that he had for me and if I did the work and did things his way. And that's where I'm at today, guys. So that healing stage, that forgiveness stage, that deep reflection, that process took a while. It was uncomfortable, God, but it was so worth it. I would do it again. Okay, I would do it again. But God showed me a lot about myself that I didn't know. He showed me some things about myself that I wasn't able, that my therapist, I went to therapy a couple times, that my therapist wasn't able to identify. So I had an addiction to alcohol. I spoke about that. And I thought that coping mechanism came from, that was my way of coping with depression from all of the traumatic events that I had went through. And it wasn't. The coping mechanism was for abandonment and rejection that I have been dealing with. That stemmed back from my childhood. But when I experienced it, whether it be with a partner that I was with or in my career, or in friendships, whatever the case may be, when I felt that I was being abandoned or felt rejected, I would turn to alcohol as a coping mechanism. And thank God, by the grace of God, God has delivered me from alcohol, you guys. It's been, it would have been a year in April of this year. So it's been over a year that God has set me free and delivered me from alcohol. And when I say set me free, I mean in a second. It's something that I struggled with for 10 years, but God delivered me in a second, and I never went back to it. He literally delivered me in 1 second, never went back to it, never went back to it. The enemy has tried to tempt me with it plenty of times, but I'm covered by the blood of Jesus. I started about 4 years ago, and over the last 2 years, it has really intensified. And I know that God is going to continue to keep processing me, and that is okay. Anybody who walks closely with God, you know that that's just a part of your walk with Christ. So God actually gave me a revelation for this video. And as I was thinking, God, I never expected to be a single mother raising a child on my own. I never expected to be homeless and to lose everything. But by the grace of God, he restored everything to me. That things that catches us off guard doesn't catch God off guard. Nothing does. Okay, not our failures, not our weaknesses, not our bad decisions, not even the things that the enemy is strategizing to come against us. Nothing God is not unaware of. He already knows all things from the end to the beginning. And God has already determined that we're going to make it through whatever it is. So we don't have to worry. We don't have to fret. And the word, the scripture that God gave me for this was Genesis 50:20. And this is from the NIV. And it says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of lives." And that speaks so much about this channel, because what the devil meant for evil, God meant it for my good. And I'm here to share that testimony. And I know that my testimonies and the words, the words that he gives me, that it will help someone else as well. So I hope that you all enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.